The words themselves are simple. The tests confirm it's dementia. But the silence that follows is always the loudest sound in the room. It's the sound of a life fracturing into a before and an after. I've had to deliver this news more times than I can count, and every single time I watch a person's world tilt on its axis. The results from brain scans, memory assessments, cognitive tests, they all point to one clinical conclusion. But in that room, it isn't clinical. It's deeply personal. It's the start of an emotional journey that has no map. A journey that begins with one singular, terrifying question. Now what? Recently, I diagnosed a man named Arthur. He is 68 years old, or at least, as he joked to me, he thinks he is. He used to be a history teacher. He could recite the dates of major battles in the Tudor dynasty, list the lineage of Roman emperors, and explain the economic factors that led to the fall of the Berlin Wall without hesitation. His life was a library of facts and stories. Now his own story feels to him like a book with pages torn out. As I explained the findings and showed him images of his brain on the screen, he later told me all he could hear was a rushing sound, like the ocean. On the scans, there were areas of atrophy, shadows where there should have been fullness. I used words like progression. His wife Sarah held his hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. I could see the tremor in both of them. In truth, the diagnosis was a shock, but also not entirely unexpected. For the last year or two, things had been off. He had stood in grocery stores unable to remember why he was there. He had lost the thread of conversations, even with his own son. Simple tasks like making tea had become strangely complicated. Did he put the tea bag in? Did he turn the kettle on? The small signposts of his day were quietly vanishing. Like many families, they blamed aging, but a part of him already knew. Beneath it all was a cold dread that this was something more. Strangely, hearing the word dementia brought a flicker of relief. It gave a name to the monster in the shadows. It meant he wasn't simply losing it. There was a reason. But that relief was a tiny candle in a hurricane of fear. The diagnosis provided an answer, yet it felt as though it had stolen the future he had imagined. When I deliver a diagnosis like this, I walk a very fine line. My responsibility is to be direct. Research shows that naming the disease, saying dementia or Alzheimer's clearly, is essential. There can be no ambiguity. But I must also manage the emotional fallout, the denial, the tears in a spouse's eyes, the frozen terror in a patient's face. And sometimes, yes, a sliver of relief. Because uncertainty can be just as agonizing. Arthur's cognitive testing placed him in stage 4 of the global deterioration scale, early stage dementia, where symptoms are clearly identifiable to a professional. On average, this stage lasts around 2 years. That isn't false hope, it's context. Life does not stop the moment someone leaves my office. We talked about next steps, follow-up appointments, medication reviews, support services. The goal is to replace the overwhelming question, now what, with one simple, manageable first step. Because this journey, as daunting as it feels, is taken one step at a time. The car ride home was silent, Sarah later told me. The world outside looked exactly the same. Same trees, same houses, same people walking their dogs. But inside, everything had shifted. Arthur described feeling like a ghost, already fading. A disease that would erase him, piece by piece. The first night was the worst. He lay awake replaying every forgotten name and misplaced object from the past year, a cruel highlight reel of decline. He looked at his wife sleeping beside him and felt anger so intense it took his breath away. Anger at his own brain, anger at fate. That anger was quickly followed by guilt. For 40 years he had been the fixer, the dependable one. Now he felt like the broken thing. The next morning he attempted to resume normality. He stood in front of the coffee machine, a ritual performed daily for decades, and for 30 seconds had no idea what to do. The sequence was gone. Sarah gently took over. He nodded and walked away, feeling useless. That first week was a blur of hushed phone calls. They told their son Michael, whose voice cracked as he tried to be strong. Friends called, and Arthur struggled to find words. How do you tell someone you are slowly disappearing while the world keeps moving? In an attempt to prove he was still himself, he went into his study and opened a familiar book on the Plantagenet kings. The words were legible, but meaning wouldn't stick. The sanctuary of his life's work now felt like a monument to a man he used to be. The question evolved, not just now what, but who am I now? The first weeks after diagnosis are critical. The structured safety of the clinic disappears, and the reality settles at home, where every routine can become a challenge. Denial, anger, deep sadness, all surface here. That is why I insist on a follow-up within a month. It is a lifeline. It communicates one powerful message: you are not alone. We discuss legal and financial matters, lasting power of attorney. We build support systems. I remind families that life is not over. The progression is gradual. Most people diagnosed early have years of meaningful life ahead. Our role is to help them navigate those years with dignity and quality. The first months became, as Arthur described, a masterclass in adaptation. Sarah became the architect of a smaller, manageable world. A whiteboard appeared in the kitchen listing appointments and daily structure: breakfast, walk, lunch, read, dinner. At first he hated it. It felt infantilizing. But soon it became an external memory, a silent partner in his day. Cupboards were labeled plates, mugs, tea and coffee. It seemed absurd in a kitchen used for 40 years. But on days when his mind went blank, a single word became a beacon in the fog. Then came the hardest surrender: the car keys. After a minor parking incident, he realized he had forgotten to check his blind spot. The law requires notification of the licensing agency after diagnosis. Following assessment, his license was revoked. Holding that letter felt heavy. It wasn't about driving. It was about independence. His social life shifted too. University friends spoke about current affairs and books. Rapid conversation became exhausting. He nodded and smiled, hoping not to be questioned directly. Some friends stopped visiting. It is painful but common. Early-stage dementia, often lasting around 2 years, is about adapting environment and routine to reduce cognitive load and preserve energy for what matters. Whiteboards and labels are not defeat, they are empowerment. We encourage families to adapt hobbies rather than abandon them. Audiobooks instead of dense texts, potted plants instead of large gardens. Engagement slows decline and preserves quality of life. Connection changes form, less debate, more presence, and presence is enough. After the first year, the fog deepens. Questions repeat. Answers are forgotten within minutes. The weariness in a spouse's eyes becomes harder to hide. One afternoon, Arthur became disoriented in a park he had walked for decades. Familiar paths felt foreign. Panic set in. A stranger helped him call Sarah. Her voice grounded him. Personality changes followed. Irritability, sudden anger over trivial triggers. In moments of clarity, he recognized this wasn't his old self, but felt powerless to stop it. This transition into the middle stage can last several years and is often the most emotionally challenging. Memory loss deepens. Daily life requires significant support. Repetition, confusion, behavioral changes. These are hallmark symptoms. Caregivers must understand, these behaviors are not willful. Frontal lobe changes impair emotional regulation. The person is not giving you a hard time. They are having a hard time. Caregiver education, redirection strategies, respite, therapy, these become essential. We also remain vigilant for sudden declines that may signal reversible delirium from infections or medication effects. Then something unexpected sometimes happens. Acceptance. Arthur described a day when the fight left him. Tired of frustration, tired of comparison with who he once was. In that surrender, something shifted. They began attending a memory cafe run by a local charity. A former pianist played simple melodies from deep procedural memory. A former CEO carefully arranged sugar packets. There was no judgment, only acceptance. Arthur began to find joy in smaller things. Sunlight, the pattern of leaves, Sarah's laugh. He might not remember breakfast, but he remembered the feeling of her hand in his. His factual memory faded, but his emotions remained vivid. One day, Sarah brought home paints and a canvas. He began painting bold colors with no plan, just feeling. It became expression without language. He was no longer defined by lost roles, teacher, driver, fixer. He was still a husband, still capable of joy, still here. This stage of redefinition is profound. Dementia is not the end of meaningful life. It is the end of life lived one way, and the beginning of life lived another. Art, music, repetitive tasks, these tap into procedural memory that outlasts short-term recall. They restore purpose. Memory cafes succeed because they remove stigma and honor the present moment. I see resilience here. Spouses communicating through touch and shared songs, finding the person inside the fog. Identity is not just memory, it is connection, it is emotion, it is love. Arthur's story is not over, though the pages are thinner now. There are days he does not recognize his son, days when the world feels like disconnected fragments. But often he recognizes Sarah. Her voice remains an anchor. Dementia is called the long goodbye, and medically it is progressive. But it is also a long lesson in what truly matters. While we do not yet have a cure, we do have support. We have structured care pathways. We have community. We have dignity. If you or someone you love is facing this diagnosis, please know there is help. Reach out to organizations such as the Alzheimer's Society or Dementia UK. A diagnosis is not the final chapter. It is the beginning of a new story. You are not alone, and there is always hope.